Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Panel discussion on rootstock choice. I'm Vian Steyn from Ortgrow. I'll be leading the panel discussion. I'm in the meat industry, and that's probably why they chose me. Meating industry, I guess I should say. I'll introduce my panel right now, but first of all, I want to share a slide. And Tristan has already mentioned that we've got a lot of diversity and choice nowadays. The motto of our country, after all, is strength and diversity. So if you go back, and the earliest data I could find was 2011, if you go back to then, you could see that we were mostly on M793, Tristan introduced the rootstock. M7 was important, and MM109, and if you add those numbers up, you got close to 100% of rootstocks planted. Now I move on 5 years or so to 2016, and what you see is that M7 has increased, MM109 has increased, M7 has dramatically decreased, and there's a little bit of M9 and 0.5% of Geneva 708. And then that's more or less the time also when the Orchard of the Future project, which started off in 2010, was starting to bear results. It showed and it proved to everybody that M9 could work under South African conditions, and after all, it was the rootstock planted all over the world. So we expected that we would see an increase in dwarfing rootstocks being planted, and yet that's not entirely what we saw. So it's a bit more nuanced than that. If you now look at what we currently stand, these are numbers from last year, the newest data, 34% on Geneva 708. Now I kind of ordered the rootstocks in terms of vigorousness, but I guess that's also something we can debate about. So 708, 34%. M7 still important to 20%. MM109 has decreased to 8%. M793 is gone. 16% on M9, so third most planted. And then 10% on Geneva 890, which has suddenly also come up in the ranks. All right, so we're going to have a discussion on rootstocks. We're going to try to understand what's currently driving rootstock choice in South Africa, vigor control, precocity, soil, climate adaptations, economics, labor conservations, mechanization, risk management, some of those things mentioned by Nick, also by Tristan. And yes, we'll see how it goes, because you probably know, there's a joke where they say if you've got 10 horticulturists standing around an apple tree, how do you prune it? Well, the answer is you shoot 9. I guess when you have a discussion about the best rootstock, there's actually no survivors sometimes. So, but yes, we've already heard that there's context that should be taken in consideration. So helping me with this discussion today, we've got 4 experts around the table. I'm going to start on my right and introduce, first of all, Angelique Pretorius. She's a technical manager at Kromco. For the brevity, I'm not going to go all the details, everything. You can share more if you want. Willie, same goes for you. Willie Kotze from the Letoe group, also a technical manager there. Then on the far left is Neelius Kapp, the owner of the consultancy firm Soil to Root, and I guess the name of the consultancy says exactly what Neelius does. And then Frederik Vogt, the man on my left, horticultural product specialist at ZZ2 Farming Group. He's also involved in Cape Sweet Nursery, Vitriplant and Core Fruit, with lots of experience as well in terms of nursery tree propagation. Okay, so we're going to start with production systems and vigor choices. And Willie, we're going to start with you, and that's all right. So I know that your group is planting a lot of M9, increasingly planting on M9. So what I would like to know from you is what's driving that decision. What planting densities are you guys looking at, and what benefits are you aiming to capture through using M9 in those systems?
Hi, Bian. I hear the
slide, you can actually close the slide, thank you.
No, it's fine. Before they close it, I just want to ask, is the 708 a typo, or should that be 778?
778, thank you.
Yeah, I heard the crowd. Yeah, okay, so for everybody's comfort, there's not a new rootstock, it's 778.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so the question about M9, I think Nick summarized the question of a rootstock in a system quite good. And I'm going to park the system for the first part of the question just a little bit to the left, and I will touch on it briefly. But in the end, you can't really separate the two, because you have a rootstock and a system. So to answer the question about a rootstock is also answering the question about the system. And the first thing is that if you want to change something, you need to identify what do you or why do you want to change. So identify a problem or identify a new goal or driver. So if you just want to plant closer, it's not the end all or be all to be on a different rootstock. So for us, the question is why change the rootstock or why change the system? And some of it was already answered in some of the previous presentations, but for us, the one key thing was we want to change the type of fruit that we produce. So we've set a goal to say, let's call it for now 4,500 cartons of high color class 1 export fruit per hectare every year, with a consistent fruit size, a targeted fruit size, and consistent production over time. We want to decrease labor demand in harvest time, so we don't want to spend more harvest time in the time that it's the most crucial time to get people in to do the job. We don't want to increase the output per person because that puts risk on the type of handling and the probable errors that there might be. So don't put up, if he needs to pick one fruit, that's better than the same person trying to pick two fruit and make a mistake on one. So if we can reduce the labor inputs to get the fruit at the right maturity with uniform color, uniform size, into the bin at the right time, with probably 2 picks rather than 4 picks, that was our goal and our driver, and to be consistent at it. And for that, we needed a different rootstock to what we used to. So Nick said that you can fight the vigor, but that makes it really difficult if you want to be consistent because it's always up and down. It's very difficult to keep the vigor constant on something like that. So we needed to change the rootstock that can give us constant bud quality throughout the tree from the top to the bottom and the inside to the outside. And the only way we can do that is to have a narrower canopy on a more dwarfing rootstock, or call it precocious if you want to, but it's both in this case. So we needed to move to a more dwarfing rootstock. And we wanted to plant that system under a net as well. So we needed something that won't run out of control with vigor. And yeah, so that was our main goals and driver, to get to a rootstock where we can have these types of systems. And in this case, the M9 ticked the box for us of most of what we want to do. And the reason why we didn't go, we are looking into Genevas, but it's a slow gain for us, just because there was more experience to be gained on something like M9. When we planted the first future orchard projects and we planted the first M9 rootstocks, we had something to gain some knowledge on. And in the meantime, since we've started with exploring these more dwarfing rootstocks in South Africa, there's been more confidence in some of the M9s and a little bit of a bumpy road on some of the Genevas. So we are leaning more towards something like M9 for now, but there's a lot of promising new Genevas that's coming up. And as time learns, we will slowly adapt and test and trial out those in the same rootstock setups. But for now, our main focus is on M9 for that reason, and to get those types of canopies and consistencies.
Which are some of those new Genevas that you are looking at, Willie, that you think has got promise?
I think that the two most obvious ones for now in the, let's call it M9 Vigor, is probably 757 and 202, which has got a lot of promise at this stage. And I think around the M7 Vigor class, there's also one or two that might have potential in very weaker soil conditions, or in some instances where we can't go very narrow because of the terrain that we're planting. But for now, that would be our main focus for that. So we have tried to fast track something like 969 on the Genevas, and yeah, that didn't work out too well for me.
Okay, so I was going to go next to you, Angelique, but I'm just quickly going to pivot here to Frederik. And Frederik, do you think in terms of some of the new Genevas, the dwarfing ones at high density, that the cost of the tree might, we've heard about the you've got to go and ask the bank for the money. You think it plays a role maybe in the uptake of some of the more dwarfing Geneva rootstocks? Because, I mean, you've got a tree cost that's increased, and then, the royalty, and yeah.
Thanks, Vian. I think Nick have point out that figure he showed on the presentation. You start off with a capital, you know what it is, or sometimes you obviously have to budget for it. So you have an idea what the cost is, but I think the challenge is for that graph to break even. And I think he also mentioned that the management, you have to be on time, doing things on time. But I think if you can get it right, then the result is there. The fruit size, as Willie have mentioned, the packouts can improve. So if you look at the cost, obviously it can cost you anything between 250 and 300,000 rand extra if you go for high density. So, and that, obviously the tree cost is a big part of that, over 100,000, 120,000. The royalties for the rootstock, if you use a Geneva, the sign variety royalties. And if you use a tissue culture as a rootstock, it's an additional 80,000 rand a hectare. So obviously, it's a big capital investment, but the rewards can be there if you do it right. And I think that's a management decision you're making. You want to aim for something, and if you can achieve that, and you have to achieve it, otherwise the bank is going to be on your back to get the money back. But it can be rewarding if you do everything right, if you do the capex and the budgeting of that.
Thank you. Now, Willie, I mean, obviously your group has done the sums and it makes sense for you. But now, Angelique, I'm really interested in hearing your opinion, because in your group, you're actually planting both vigorous Geneva 778, and you're also planting M9. So what's the thinking behind that in your group, and how does it work? So it's something that's quite vigorous, and something that's on the scale that we plant in South Africa, very dwarfing.
It depends with who they buy. That's where the decision lies. No, it's just a joke. So in Kromko, in context, I've looked up the data. What have we planted in the last 4 years? And it's 55% 778. Secondly, it's 25% M9. Ross Haynes is today in the crowd. He is a big lover of NEC 29 with huge success. So most of our growers are going for that clone. Some are leaning towards T337, and then it's only EMLA. Our third largest was still M7 EMLA at 10%, and it was 5% Geneva 228 and additional 5% at 890. So growers are just starting to look at different selections. We have two groups. The first group is we have third generation replant soils, and growers tells me, Angelique, I do not want to struggle to get growth on my trees, because if I don't get growth, I'm not going to get to my cumulative tons, and they would rather fight vigor than struggle to get a tree to grow. A second grouping is also, they say, we want to think future forward. Mechanization, we want to drive productivity, we want simplicity. I liked what Jacques said to me. He's also in the crowd today at the Rust, because I have 778 and M9, and people ask him, but why change? And like, we're still learning, but we're driving productivity. So I like what he said to me. He's like, I would like uniformity on the tree, because at the end of the day, the person who's making the biggest decision on my farm is the picker. So if I have uniformity on the tree, and you have less people culling and making that decision, is it going into a Kromko bin, or is it going to juice? So it's not just mechanization, but just labor-friendly, how you're going to farm it. And then I've mentioned now Rust and Glenfroon, they're definitely looking at terroir. And they just don't drink the wine at the braai, they express it on their farming as well. So they look at the soil, that's where Nelius comes in. And they would say, listen, what is the soil potential? Is it medium, low, or high? And they would plant what would be the best for them to get into production. If it's a low potential soil, we've learned something now. Do not plant 778 at 3.5 by 1.25, a medium potential apple soil in Grabouw with a granny or lady in red, and think you're going to stop it with the tons. you're going to put in a lot of labor. So then we've learned now, some growers are saying, okay, if it's medium potential, I'm rather going back to 1.5 planting. And then when we have good southern slopes, cooler, we're going to go for M9. But I must stress, I feel if you're going to plant 3.5 by 1 or 3.5 by 1.25, and it's a high value product, Granny, Pinks, Joya, protected from the sun. Because we do get larger fruit, we start seeing the branches slightly dipping, and even if it's not a sunburn season, it becomes your biggest culling. So, yeah, that's basically the two groupings.
Now, I think kind of an obvious question. It wasn't one of those we looked at before, but it's relevant, I think. So we're sitting at, let's say, 30% seedling vigor, 80%, 90% seedling vigor with the two choices. But why aren't people looking at the 50%? You know, is it because there isn't a good rootstock choice in that middle ground, or you know, at the moment we're opting for either the very dwarfing or the very vigorous?
Yeah. So in our group, there was a lot of plantings on MM109 and M7 MLA in the past, and I have some growers who never planted M7 MLA because they didn't want to struggle with suckering, and still vigor was the challenge. I think there's uncertainty. Everyone is looking at the moment 890 in that class, looking how it's going to perform. I'm not against the selection, but I must stress, until we do not have data for at least 10 years with signed combinations, I'm very hesitant to tell growers go commercially. Willie, I just want to share my sentiment with you on the 969. We were super amped for 969, planted it, and we're like, oh, this is not working out. And we don't want to end up in a similar situation. So I think I heard SAPU's bring additional 3 Genevas in, something for you guys to talk about. But I think there's so many choices. And the other thing is, we do play around with our planting. I have growers who told me now, I said 4 by 1.5, they would go back to 778. Maybe you can still go to 4 by 1.25. You can play around with that, but only experience will learn. So yeah.
Thank you. Willie, Frederik has alluded to you know, obviously you're putting in more money with the high intensive systems and the dwarf rootstock, aiming for high return, good quality fruit and all of that. But what can go wrong, and how do you know? So you would have considered the risks in planting that dwarfing rootstock. You know, what are those, and how do you going to manage it?
What can go wrong with the dwarfing one or the vigorous one?
Dwarfing. Now, vigorous, because I was going to ask Angelique, but she already mentioned it. You know, those close plantings are the vigorous ones. But
yeah. So I think there's two things that can go wrong with the dwarfing ones, and yeah. So we've got a couple of orchards where the M9 is not performing. And I think we all have some of those orchards where it's just not filling its space, and it's kind of difficult to figure out why it's not happening. But luckily, that's on the very low side. That's a very marginal percentage of our orchards. And up until now, we've planted most of the M9s on most of our, I would say, best soil potentials. And as I sit here today, we've started to use Regalis on most of our M9 orchards. They've become too vigorous. And we can go on why that's happening. But I think, and as we gain more experience, we're going to roll it out to more marginal soils or medium potential soils over time, just because we're learning how to manage it. Even with stuff like drip irrigation, and limiting the root volume, we're gaining more experience with that as well. So I think we're becoming less and less concerned with the issues of M9. If we get good plant material, I think there's very little risk, especially if you plant it in really narrow rows. So if you're going to plant it 4 meters wide, and I'm exaggerating now, but you're probably going to struggle to fill the space. But at the 3.2 or 3.5 meter row spacing or 3 meter row spacing, and you plant a good tree and you just need to grow it 1.5 meters more, 1.2 meters more, the risk is really relatively low.
Okay, good to hear. You've mentioned one thing about the vigorous, but do you want to add anything on the vigorous with risks?
Yeah, so we are definitely in the honeymoon phase at Kromco with 778. Pete always jokes with me when I tell growers this. But we are achieving amazing results because of very good plant material. Culloden Valley Nursery is here today, but we're receiving trees that are more than 2.2 meters on average. We're cropping in second leaf, third, fourth, and by fifth leaf, and this is real stats that I'm sharing now, we have bingo orchards averaging 520 tons cumulative, and we still have vigor in the tops. But that's planted 3.5 by 1.25. So yes, we're making money, but what you do have to realize is there's no nitrogen given in summer, it's only post-harvest in autumn. We are definitely going to think of girdling, so it's labor. We're doing later and later pruning. They do hedge cutting, but it's always in November. There's also even autumn hedge cutting. If you don't have a hedge cutter, you're going to do manually, so you're upping the labor on pruning. It's also using PGRs to control. I know in series root pruning is a huge trend to help fighting vigor that comes at the cost of quality. So I'm just seeing a lot of work in the future. And if we're really saying we're going to think about input cost and labor, I don't think that is where we want to be. And the last thing I want to say is we have been through this, because when I started consulting, I remember Appleweight Farm, there was orchards planted with M793 1 meters apart in the plant row. And those orchards did not make 20, 25 years. And they were grubbed due to the fact that they lost production because of light. So we already went through this, in my opinion.
Good, thank you. We're going to come back to nursery tree quality again, and I'm going to ask you, Frederik, but first of all, I'm going to go to Nelius now. So, and we've really, I think, moved into site selection, site choice. So from a climate and soil perspective, what do you think, what should growers think about, when they match rootstocks, say 778, M7, M9, or 890 for that matter, to a specific production environment?
So I listened to what all you said, and I listened to all the different rootstock choices that there is. And I think there's an answer lying in our soil diversity and the diversity of microclimates. And that explains why we choose different rootstocks for different sites. I move between a lot of different production environments, and you can clearly see that your rootstocks behave differently under different climates and behave differently on different soils. And I would like to sketch a picture and maybe explain what I mean by it. And then by saying it, I'm not saying that you can't plant M9 in a certain area or G778 is wrong. There's very good producers here, and they have the ability to make things work. Whether it's to control the vigor or make M9 grow, they have the ability to do it. And I would like to take the example of the Eastern Free State, which is a summer rainfall area. It's a very vigorous area, like Go Bokkerveld, which is good winter chilling, and you generally don't struggle to make a tree. And then take the EGVV, which is marginal winter chill, and you generally struggle to make a tree. Now, if you take those different rootstocks in those different environments, like G778, I mean, in the Eastern Free State, you won't even consider it because it will just be extremely vigorous. Even M7 is considered too vigorous there, and M9 is your standard because it's not as vigorous as the rest, but it makes a tree. When you move to the Go Bokkerveld region with this winter chill, you have more chance of success with a dwarfing rootstock like M9, but I would still say you need to be site-specific because you get these raw shells in the Go Bokkerveld and the trees don't like it. And you have to have a more vigorous rootstock on those soil types. But then you get those fine sandy loams with a good clay fraction, and then something like M9 can do particularly well. Again, M7 makes good trees in the serious area, but then you can move to the EGVV area and you can get varying results, say on M7. M9 is seen as risky, and G778 still remains vigorous, but it has a very good adaptability. And if you take those three rootstocks and you look at soil types, your G778 has the widest adaptability that I've seen, even on very marginal soils. And by that I mean 80% plus rock. I mean gravelly soils with very low clay fractions, white sandy soils. A G778 is still making a tree and is productive, where M7 would probably fail and M9 will definitely fail. Whereas M9, you would put on your soils with a better clay fraction, not too gravelly, still good drainage, and then your chances of success is higher. Yeah, that's basically the rundown.
You would say so we've got a heck of a lot of diversity in topography and climate and soil and everything, but so for each and every location, there is a potential best choice, and when there isn't a best choice, the second best choice can still be managed to some extent.
Yeah, the best choice is a difficult one because there's so many factors playing a role in the end result. And it's something that the growers will see with the field day, something that stood out for me, and it links up to what Nick said. The growers understand farming and they understand the principles and they manage well. So they have the ability to take a second best and make it work. So yes, there's obvious scenarios that will lead to failure, and those are the ones that you have to avoid. So for instance, taking M9, putting it on a sandy soil on top of a hill in Grabouw where it's exposed to wind is a very bad idea.
Freek, are there any factors that we haven't mentioned yet that we should be considering?
No, I just want to add, I think if you plant a dwarfing rootstock in a high density, the biggest mistake you can make to plant it in a poor soil. And that's, you have mentioned, Nelius. But also, if you plant a substandard tree, then you're born dead. Because it's a dwarfing rootstock, some nurseries, they struggle to propagate a large tree to start up with. And like most of the more vigorous rootstocks, you can do stem renewing. But if you do stem renewing with the M9 tree, actually you're making the tree more dwarfing. So you're dead from the beginning. So I think that's important. Not important is to start off good. Otherwise, as I've mentioned, the future of that orchard is doomed from the year one.
Okay, now at the risk of stepping on some toes, nursery tree quality, how important is it, and what would you define as good nursery tree quality?
Yeah, I think nursery tree quality is obviously it's a physical quality, which is the size, diameter of the tree. Then the physiological side of the tree is the good harden of tree. Obviously, the quality of the tree is, as I mentioned, physical, but also the carbon, the quality of the tree. So, and the good hardening of tree to start off good. I think that's the most important thing. Okay. Obviously, the quality of material that you receive, we will get to viruses and stuff, but obviously it has to be certified.
For the two of you, is certain rootstock choices maybe more forgiving of poor tree quality, or put another way, is it more important when you plant some rootstocks that the nursery tree quality is great?
I think the dilemma is whether you plant a big or a small tree, for a lack of a better definition of it, and whether it's a strong rootstock or not. If you plant a small tree in an intensive system where you want early yields and cropping, we spoke about this last week as well at the nursery open day. You end up pushing it with nitrogen to get to the top, and the more dwarfing the rootstock is, the harder you're going to push it, and for a little bit longer. So the idea with intensive systems is that you start cropping class 1 quality fruit that you can put into premium markets, especially for us that needs to export, that's got some time on the boat as well. So you want to start producing that early. So if you start off with a small tree, you end up pushing it harder. So the more dwarfing the rootstock is, the harder you're going to push it for the longer. So either one or two things is going to happen. So eventually when the tree fills the space by the third leaf, you're either going to on a more vigorous rootstock, you'll probably start slowing down the nitrogen, but then you'll have a residual effect of what you've done, and that will carry over into the next 2 or 3 years, and you will end up with fruit that's got that's going to color later, and that's probably not going to hold as long in storage. So you'll end up with some physiological post-harvest risks or defects, if I can call it that. The other option is if you don't fill the space and you start cropping, you're going to continue to apply nitrogen. So you're going to delay your break even, because now you have to sell that fruit into a lower risk market. So you delay your break even time for that. And still now you still apply nitrogen. So again, you don't get color, you pick it at delayed maturity, you have oversized fruit. So you add on all the possible post-harvest defects that you get. So planting a substandard tree into an intensive system is probably one of the worst things that you can do, in my opinion.
Want to add anything, Angelique?
Yeah, so if it's a V8 engine like 778, it's fine if it's a small tree. It will grow within the first year. But I would just want to add with Willie in the EGVV scenario, if we get small M9s or 202s, we call them ankle biters. They're very small. Chasing the tree height, and when it doesn't stop the terminal bud of the leader and it grows through, we call it pineapple copper, that short internodes. That's typically where blindwood starts, and we would normally, with that ring where it grows and stops and regrow, we have to do a lot of work to get breaks there. And the best thing for us is to cut back and then start again. So you don't want that stop growth effect as well. And it also happens when irrigation is not an optimum, especially when people go for December on leave, then you see that growth stop and going. So you want to start off with actually not a tall whip tree. I like a medium to large tree that has feathers. Die knipboom. Yeah.
Okay, and that'll be a very nice topic for another panel discussion as well. I'm now first going to move to the nutrition expert again, because we've touched on nutrition, nitrogen, so I would like to also ask your feeling on that in terms of pushing the trees. And then secondly, I'm going to ask you, we've been told, and the Geneva group has been doing fantastic work on characteristics of the rootstocks that they have bred in terms of the differences in nutrient uptake. So I'm going to ask you, to what extent should we care what they find? They say potassium, hypoaccumulator, bitter pit risk, all those kind of things. So the two questions, nitrogen and then the other nutrients.
Okay. Yeah, Billy, you actually summarized it extremely well. So when you apply nitrogen and in large quantities, it doesn't stop when you stop. It's built into the reserves and it carries over a couple of seasons. And I've seen, especially when you take a gram per tree approach on a higher density, you end up applying a lot more nitrogen on a kilogram per hectare basis compared to your 4 by 1.5 or 4 by 1.75. So I'm adopting a more kilogram per hectare approach, and the message is clear to the growers: this is not a program anymore. This is an approach. You apply X amount every 2 weeks, or you can apply every week if you want to. But when you see in year 2 that you're busy filling your space, or the tree is busy running, stop. Stop immediately with that nitrogen so that we can get those levels down. So exactly to try and prevent that prolonged nitrogen that still manifests over time. A tree is not a switch. You don't switch it on and switch it off as you give fertilizer and not give it fertilizer. It is built into reserves and it carries over. And then about the hyperaccumulation of, say, potassium, I mean, G890 came out as one, but I mean, M7 is actually the same. My experience is M7 accumulates potassium very easily, and especially if you have lower yield, you see a suppression of calcium, which steers it towards defects. So I would say if you're dealing with very sensitive cultivars susceptible to defects, have an eye on the rootstock, especially if something like Fuji or Braben and Goldens. But I want to highlight Braben and Fuji, especially with this alternate bearing cycle. I mean, it's extremely difficult to maintain any ratio of any kind with or off yield. Because you fertilizing the trees while there is a crop on, and you need to support that crop, but then there's a carryover to the next season. And as I said, a tree is not a switch. You can't just switch it off and say, okay, I didn't give it fertilizer. If the yield is low enough, the carryover from reserves can also be in excess. So okay. Then the other part of that question is, we can manipulate the fertilizer program. We don't have free potassium. We can just exclude it from the program. We can reduce the quantity. We can reduce the amount applied at a time. We can play around with that. If a rootstock has a preference towards potassium, we can bring in gypsum into the program. It is a very effective way of supplying calcium, far better than all these sprays that we're spraying. So you can play around with the nutrition and then compensate for the lack of good quality characteristics.
Okay, so what you're saying, basically, to a large extent, we can manage it, yeah, from a soil scientist perspective. Thank you. I think let's take a couple of questions now from the audience, 3 questions or so. But questions on the stuff that we've already discussed. We will still delve into scheme and that kind of thing. So if there's any questions on what we've already discussed, anybody from the audience? Okay, there is a question from Nick, it seems. Thanks, Nick.
I'll pick on Billy, but anyone can answer. It's a pretty simple one, Billy. So you've obviously got some older, more vigorous canopies. You've got some more modern, well-balanced canopies, let's say. Just put simply, which ones do the staff like working in more?
The one we tell them to.
If they have a choice.
Yeah. No, I think if you look at the amount of work that goes into fighting vigor, I would say 9 out of 10 orchards that we walk into, I mean, it's always pruning, more summer pruning, taking out branches this time of the year, cutting away more branches, making more mistakes on counting the fruit. So the vigorous stuff is always the more battles. So having a tree, that argument, yeah, I'd rather fight with a tree in slowing down the vigor a little bit more compared to having a tree that doesn't want to fill its space. Like I said, in 9 out of 10 orchards that we walk into, it's like a constant battle to control the vigor. That's what I want to say 50% of my job is battling vigor, controlling vigor, finding out ways to control the vigor, debates on how much regalis you should put down and stuff like that. I mean, and that's, yeah, eventually you get to a point where you can only do this much. And once you get to an over-vigorous canopy where you have a trunk this big, it becomes, and you've got a pipe all the way to the top that's that big, I mean, it becomes difficult to control the vigor. We always say we've got a lot of tools in a toolbox, but there's a point where it starts to kind of run out.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think probably one thing there is just dwarfing stock is a management tool for you, yeah?
More questions from the audience? Surely you guys have got questions on rootstocks, don't you? I can't see. Oh, there's one here right in front. Catherine?
Can you hear me?
We can.
We're all very, very curious to know about the coloration on the G757. Because everyone is excited that it might be a Geneva replacement for M9, and yet we're all aware that there is certainly in the trials evidence that it doesn't colour very well on the reds and the pinks.
Yeah, I don't think all is aware, but Tristan can maybe, I think this question can go to Tristan. Tristan, where are you? There, you kind of stand out. Thanks, Tristan.
Yeah, so we've done some research on big bucks, so block gala, 757 included in the trials, and we do see statistical differences in overcolor between 757 and the other rootstocks in a predominant number of the trials that we've done. So I think we've done sampling from 4 trials, and we've seen that pattern in 3 of the 4 trials. But it's like I was saying to Vian the other day, one must be careful thinking that a statistical difference is a meaningful commercial difference. So we're using a color chart, Big Bucks color chart, that's 1 to 8. And we're talking about a difference where the rest of the rootstocks are 7.9 and 757 is 7.2. So are you going to make more money on the 7.9 compared to the 7.2 when the maximum is 8? Probably not. So there's something that we need to look at, continue to look at with 757. I know that some of the producers in the Free State have said that maybe it can hang a little bit longer, a week longer on the Lady in Red trial that we have there, but there's nothing conclusive at this stage. We're still in the early stages of evaluating color for 757 specifically.
Thanks, Tristan. That's a relevant question. Any more questions? Oh, there's a hand right over there, Miku, and then we can take a fourth one. It's fine. You don't want to go. Oh, you put your hand up for Miku. Thanks.
Neelius, from a soil science perspective, if we look at all the photos that Nick showed of those multi-litre M9 orchards, there were no ridges in any of those orchards. I had a conversation a week ago with a client. He wants to plant M9, and we were talking about the effective depth needed on in the soil, needed for a higher density planting. And can we get away with shallower soils because we're planting higher density on a tree that we might have a smaller root system? I just wanted to know what your take on that kind of thinking is.
Well, first take a step back and you need to ask what climatic zone you're in. I think in the past soil depth conversation, or why they said 80 centimeters, was to do with how wet it gets. So where the water table comes up in the winter and you don't want those roots in a saturated environment, that for me is where that soil depth came from. So to put it to you simply, if you had a dry climate and you were in full control of the irrigation or the water that's supplied to the tree, you can actually farm in a very shallow soil because you're controlling it. And I think that soil depth came from there. It's in so in Grabouw, it gets extremely wet. When you're on a ridge, your roots is out of that saturated environment, and the 80 centimeters come from there. So for me, with improved techniques like we have drainage, we have ridging, we can definitely go on shallower soils with the ridge. A bit of a complication is that the closer the spacing becomes, the narrower the ridge becomes. And then the fluctuation and water content and temperature becomes more. So you don't want a very narrow ridge because then something like the M9 will be affected by it. So I always remember Tini saying, the wider your ridge, the more it starts acting like a flat soil surface. But the narrower it gets, the more the temperature and moisture content fluctuates. So there's a limit for me. Other factor that you have to keep in the back of your mind is when you have a flat soil surface, you have small depressions. And water accumulates in those depressions and causes saturated conditions. And you can see it in the Free State as well. When it gets very wet, you get these puddles around the trees and they go yellow. They don't want it. And what the ridge just allows the water to flow away from the trees. So some form of ridging, informally, I do recommend. And I do believe we can go in shallower soils, but then you have to keep your climate in mind and exactly where you are.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to continue now with the panel discussion. So Frederik, and then maybe Angelique, you can add in if you want. So 53% of nursery trees produced in 2025 were reported to not be certified, so uncertified, which means unknown status of scheme viruses. Whereas only 17% of rootstocks were uncertified, but that of course doesn't help because the viruses move in the tree. So that suggests more than half the trees sold, there were no formal guarantee of freedom from scheme viruses. Now, is this significant in practice? It doesn't matter. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think the uncertified doesn't always mean it's not good. And it doesn't mean it's virus infected. There can be many reasons for material to be uncertified. Obviously, with the tissue culture, we managed to have clean material and that have increased the percentage of. So I don't think it's because of the rootstock that we have a high percentage of uncertified material.
Yeah.
It's more to do with the sign variety. And that could be for many reasons. Sometimes it could be for the certification scheme, there's certain rules you have to apply. So it could be of administrative issues, it could be a new variety, it's still not on a variety list. It could be of some test being outstanding. So yes, we want to increase the certified percentage. And I think maybe we're going to get to that point, but in the certification scheme, they're going to try to make a different category for uncertified material to be controlled. So also be part of the system to be inspected to make sure it still have a bigger status than totally uncertified. But normally it's the nurseries is in the front line, so obviously they receive the components like you're building a car. They're getting all the components from other places and they put it together. At the end of the day, it's going out of the factory. It have to be the quality control is there and they have to be inspected. And then the final chop on the certification label, then it's uncertified. And then they have to communicate it with the grower, and it's not because of the nursery that is uncertified. It's because of the IP owners. So I think with the discussions and the presentations we had of viruses and stuff, I think that still have to be done to improve that. But I think at least our rootstocks we're getting right.
So yeah. So no, what I don't want to do is to appoint blame to anybody, but what I'm rather going to rephrase the question and more ask if there are scheme viruses present in nursery trees. Is that a cause of concern? Is the problem?
Yeah, obviously, if we talk about more high density orchards and more dwarfing rootstocks, I think they're more relevant in terms of being exposed to poor growth. I think a lot of them are latent viruses. So it's not something you will see in the first year or the second year. I think it's going to be more prominent if you're using dwarfing rootstocks, and the effect of that is going to be much higher if you're using a more rigorous rootstocks. So the effect on tree quality and performance in orchards and could be severe. So obviously it can have a big influence.
Do you want to add anything, Angelique?
Yes.
Since you're on the scheme board.
Yeah. For me, there's one thing just to be cautious. Geneva comes out with, when it states from USA, sensitive to latent viruses. So if you're going to have 1 or 2 or 3 multiple viruses maybe not expressing itself, it can have an impact on the graft union. There's a lot of growers who, after the storm, said to me, listen, we've planted rootstock X, it just broke. So I'm just saying we should be very cautious about what are the effects, not just on vigor, but also on graft union strength. And I know Tristan is doing work on that, Hortgrow funding. And then the other thing is, if you're going to invest heavily in high-density plantings, and you have 10% of trees not performing optimal, it's 10% less that's coming into your pocket, and that you're going to an Afrikaans input. You're going to replant those trees again, or Billy's going to say, listen, we have to do something about that, and then it's not even. So uniformity is everything, and I think having a certified tree is just saying to yourself, listen, I'm investing for the least amount of risk. And Nick articulated managing risk so well. And last week, Miku Stander said at one of the Fieldman site visits when Blackie said, this orchard is doing so well. It was a Royal Butte orchard on MM109, where we showed them how 170 tons looked. And he said, this is a uniform orchard. And Miku said, that's very good to hear. And I think uniformity is for me a big thing. So I want the least amount of variability, and going through a certified scheme is first management.
So assuming that the virus status may cause some variability in... Okay.
Yes, and graft union strength, definitely.
Yeah. After this question, I'll probably owe both of you a beer, and you can answer it by saying no comment. Do you and your groups insist that that your growers and your group plant certified trees for the reasons stated now?
I sent several industry Fresh Quarterly, South African Fruit Journal to read. My growers don't like reading. I send WhatsApp. I use emojis, everything. And at the end of the day, the grower's going to plant based on if he can get the trees or not. So I've got 3 growers who insist on planting certified trees. And if you talk to them, they sometimes just tell you, listen, the nurseryman said, I don't have the amount that you want. So we need to get more certified trees. And what growers need to know here today, it costs you less than, what, it's R1.10 of the cost of your tree. And we're talking about viruses, but our biggest the bollocks that happened, if I could put it in that sense, I want to use the Afrikaans word, but was true to type. We had plantings now in the last 3 seasons where a grower planted Lady in Red, he ordered 778, he received M9T337, a whole planting. And that was outside the scheme. We have another grower who planted Crips Red and RDS, ordered 778 and he received 202. And the scheme doesn't just do viruses, it looks at cankers, abnormalities, root abnormalities. Everyone always just told me the scheme just gives you, it looks clean. That's not the truth. It also does traceability. If our industry just realized getting exotic virus coming in now, like apoproliferation, and most of our trees are outside the scheme, how are we going to trace it? We cannot trace that. And with plum marbling, we've seen how traceability, and that was one of the best things. So just getting the data and someone being the custodian of that. Yeah.
Thanks, Ajik. Willie, you want to answer that one?
I don't have anything to add to.
Okay. Very well answered.
Yeah, I can maybe just add something.
Yes, Frederik.
What we see in the field and what we see in nursery is that especially some of the dwarfing rootstocks, and especially in Geneva rootstocks, if you're working with virus-infected material, you can see definitely a problem with the graft compatibility and a graft take. So on a nursery level, it's playing a big role, and it's just important to know your status of material and communicate that with the grower. Of course, if you don't have enough trees for your order, and then you're in trouble, but you're not always in control of that process. So you have to make very sure that the combination you're using of the sign variety with your rootstocks. There's some varieties that you, like Fiji Short, and you use it on Geneva 228. It doesn't work. It's a challenge. But we know Shorty is virus infected, so you must either make more trees or just decide you're not going to do it.
Yeah, thanks. And I think, very evidently what popped out was 969, Geneva 969, which is very virus sensitive. And, turned out to be a disaster. Then Geneva 213 also seems to have hassle. I guess people can also just spend a bit more time, wait for Tristan's results before actually, making big planning decisions. Moving on from that. Okay, I'm going to come with a couple of more, questions to kind of wake up the audience, I think. That's the idea. I'm going to ask each panel member to tell me which, in your view, is the most overplanted rootstock and why. We can start with you, Neelius.
Thank you for that one. Well, even though I like G778 a lot, I do think its numbers will reduce percentage-wise in the future. It's an incredible rootstock. There is some very, very difficult sites that you need to plant 778 on, and that will remain. But I do think it will become less in the future. We need to step down.
Well, I'm going to bypass your question, rather concentrate on one topic we actually didn't talk about enough, is the influence of tissue culture on the nursery industry. I think it's, for our industry, it's a game changer. If you took it back to the where we started with the Geneva rootstock trial was in 2000, 26 years later, and in that trial was Geneva 778, Geneva 228, and Geneva 222. And it just shows how long it takes to develop a new rootstock and to test it. And from the early days, we saw that Geneva 778 was precocious and everybody wanted it. And we struggled for 20 years to propagate it, and the only solution was tissue culture. And don't make a long story of it, but it took a while to get it through Italy and sending it back to South Africa to propagate its rootstocks and tissue culture. And that was a game changer for the industry. Only 5 years ago, only 4% of the injuries nursery trees were tissue culture. 45% of the trees in our nurseries is on tissue culture. So I think that make a huge impact, not only on tissue culture, but the availability of your first choice rootstock. And I think for a grower that wants to plant a rootstock in his management or orchard system, and he wants a specific rootstock for what he wants to aim for, I think that's a game changer to plant your first choice rootstocks. And obviously we can see 778 was the most being propagated by tissue culture, but very soon is going to be the second biggest.
Thank you. Billy, Angelique?
I'm also going to bypass the question and just make a final comment on rootstocks and canopy systems. And a lot of the guys think that the rootstock alone is a kind of silver bullet, and it's a get out of jail free card. And we've seen a lot of plantings where you have the correct rootstock, but the canopy is not managed correctly. It's still too vigorous. It's still overcropped. You still end up with bad quality on the inside of the tree. The base still doesn't color. If it's overcropped, you have inconsistent size, return bloom issues, and everything that goes with it. So the rootstock, if the rootstock is 50%, the other 50% of that system is management. And it's very important to remember that. It's not just you plant it and now you have the genetics on your side, and now you have a get out of jail free card.
You've got to manage it like Nicole said. Yeah. Angelique? You're also going to bypass it.
No, I'm just going to answer with my pack sheet from a fruit quality post-harvest hat on. Nick articulated very well. Growers, we're going to have success with all the genetics if it's farmed well, good management. But just remember, vigor normally comes at the cost of fruit quality. So we can see the effects of 778 on grannies that are vigorous. Growers start taking away summer nitrogen. We're seeing that the loss of the green intensity after storage. Just think about also fruit quality. So from a pack sheet side, I would want the one with the calm canopy with the good fruit quality at the end of the day. And not something that's vigorous and inducing pitting disorders with storage. So, because that's where the income comes for class 1 fruit pack out and exported.
Thanks. Last question for all of you again, panel members. You can see how much time there is, so let's keep it brief. But if you had to look at 10 years from now, what does the South African apple rootstock landscape look like? So where do you think we're heading? Or alternatively, where would you want to see it? Where do you want to see it head to? We can start now this time. Let's start with Willie.
Yeah, I think narrower plantings, narrower canopies, with more uniform fruit quality and size and more consistency. That's where we need to go. So we've heard there's different conditions, and that's one of those wide answers. But I think we really need to focus on what a calm canopy looks like, and that should be our goal.
Thanks. Frederik?
I think the future is obviously we're going to see a revolution. It's already happening in the nursery industry, where we only have layer block rootstocks and whiptree in the past traditionally. But I think for the future, growers can have a choice of what type of tree they want, on what type of rootstock they want, and I think that's going to change the industry for the future. Your options going to be better or more to have a more sufficient and orchard that can deliver 200 tons per hectare.
Elias?
I believe there's going to be more of a range from vigorous to dwarfing, which will reflect the varying microclimates, the varying soils, the varying management styles. I don't think there should be a dominant rootstock.
Angelique?
I believe we're going to have all three vigor classes. There will still be 7, 7, 8. I foresee in our group we're going to have more 2 to 8. I know nurserymen don't like what I'm saying now. It's a very difficult rootstock for the nursery, but excellent when the grower receives it.
Frederick's got to sort out the TC of it. So.
Yeah. But it's slightly less vigorous, but it is not an easy tree to make. So there's also a gamble, and nurserymen cannot take the risk. I understand that. I hope I think M9 may be there, and I hope more tier 2s will be there, because we have some exceptional orchards in our Hut and Sky group that I really like what I'm seeing. And then something in the semi-vigorous class. We in Garabau, we don't really plant M7 Emla anymore, but something that is in that vigor class. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And the time for the panel discussion is up, but since the first presenters left us with about 3 minutes, it's now 12 minutes past 3 and we have until 3:15. So are there any further questions, and any questions also maybe to some of the other presenters? Yes, Hendrik?
Vian, I think this is a question for you and maybe for the plant improvement organizations or organization. I'm unsure how I should phrase this. We briefly spoke about the certification of trees and the quality of trees. What I don't see in our industry is where we are getting rid. No, let me rephrase this, it will sound better. Where we are improving plant material, i.e., where are we getting rid of the viruses within the plant material? As being involved in a nursery, you see big differences from different sources in terms of take percentage, tree quality, and the final outcome of the tree, and that runs directly into the orchard. Genetic variability, and even in rootstocks and in the science. And I don't see a movement out there saying this is a clean source of X rootstock and X variety so that we can match them to get to the goal. What is in the pipeline to change that?
Yeah.
I think that's the question.
I very much appreciate that question, and I initially was going to answer it when you started off, and I thought I'll have to answer it by saying I've learned a lot from my panel, and therefore I'm not going to answer it. But I can actually answer it. There has been a lot of discussion in the plant improvement scheme. You know that Rachel and Hugh Campbell and Nolan has gone overseas. They looked at what other people are doing elsewhere in the world, and they have come back and made recommendations. Those recommendations are taken further. I understand there will be a board decision or discussion in the board with hopefully a decision to set up some sort of a virus cleaning facility for our industry. They're looking to do that. We will have to look at the numbers and whether it's feasible and so forth, but as a missing part of plant improvement so that we actually have the ability to clean material. Linked to that, we're going to be funding a project with Gerard Peterson, which is going to be looking at nucleus material over all the plant improvement organizations, and hopefully people outside of the scheme will also join in so that we can test nucleus material with NGS and see whether it's clean or not. And if it's not clean, then clean it. Or import new material or whatever might be the case. So I think those things are afoot. What we also intend to do is to invest in, and I'm going to ask Gerard Peterson, why did we get to where we are in terms of the things you've mentioned? And the answer was, when the scheme was set up, it was set up by virologists and knowledgeable people, and then for the next 30 years there weren't a virologist involved, in the scheme. So we hope to change that and invest in virology capacity. You really, for looking at what we know now in terms of plant material quality, you need to actually have somebody plugging away at it the whole time, an expert who does that, who refine the test the whole time, find new viruses and ways to cope with them and test what they do and whatever else. So I think it's a multi-pronged approach, but there's definitely movement on that. Willie, you had your hand up.
Yeah, the motivation to plant clean material is really simple. Just wait for them to plant one orchard at 1.2 million rand that doesn't want to grow after you've eliminated all the other causes. About a 5-hectare orchard like that is a really bitter pill to swallow. So that's a very good motivation, and it kicks in really fast.
Angelique and Ross, they've been tasked within the SPV Council or board to look at a particular aspect of the scheme, and they've prepared a very, very nice PowerPoint slideshow. I think it really speaks to growers, and I know you've been going the rounds, you've been to different groups, you still need to go and see a couple, but my hope is that many growers will also get to see it, because it really speaks to the value of doing these things. And yeah. Yes, please do.
So just knowledge for this group here today. The DPA is not quarantine. Quarantine is a government function. So that's the first thing. And then when it comes to clean material, it's actually the IP owner and the plant improvement organization's role to really say, listen, I'm taking this to heart. And the scheme is not mandatory. It's a user pay. You actually raise your hand and say, hey, I want to be measured. So in all honesty, the participation is low, and normally when there's a crisis or a black swan event, people want to jump on the wagon, and we've seen that with stone fruit now. So yeah, and Willie's statement there is so true, because growers in my grouping that's asking for certified material got the raw end of uncertified material.
Okay, so I think we don't have time for more questions, and I just want to check the time here. Johannes asked me to just end it off because I'm sitting on stage.